Namaste. So I want to welcome you to today's Facebook Live video where we'll explore the idea of Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy. Let me first share a little bit about my background in this subject. Most of you know me as being involved in the world of Ayurveda, and I've been the founder, the developer of Ayurveda here at the California College of Ayurveda since 1995, exploring the many principles, both clinical, philosophical, practical, and so forth. I'm also a yoga teacher, and I'm trained in classical yoga through the Sivananda Yoga Centers. And the Sivananda Yoga Vedanta Centers are a traditional yoga center where students explore not only how to teach yoga classes, but also teach and study the classical yoga texts. And some of you are just signing in, so I want to welcome Paula, Shauna, and Priya. Thank you for joining today's program. So I was just sharing a little bit about my yoga background. I've also taught many seminars over the last 30 years in the subject of Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy, so I'm happy to be able to share that with you today. I do want to let you know that I'll give a talk for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then it'll be open to your questions, and you can type your questions in at any time during today's program. I want to welcome Nanda and Marc, Dr. Marc Halpern, who just joined us as well. Welcome to today's Facebook Live program. So let's start off with talking a bit about what is Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy and why is it important? Well, when we think about yoga, the first thing that we think about, or we should be thinking about, is that traditional yoga is a system for quieting the mind. And when we talk about quieting the mind, that is the path towards self-realization. So traditional yoga is a path of quieting the mind so that we can gain deeper and deeper awareness, attain self-realization to know our true self, and also to become one, or have the experience of becoming one with all of creation. And this is articulated in the classical text of Raja Yoga, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Now, that's one aspect of traditional yoga, and maybe the most well-known aspect of traditional yoga. Now, there are also other texts of traditional yoga, including the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the Gerinda Samhita, and the Shiva Samhita. And these texts on yoga are very fascinating texts because they integrate the understanding of Ayurveda with the understanding of yoga, and they develop yoga further than was developed in the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras focusing more really on the meditation aspect of yoga, and these other texts focusing on more detailed practices. Now, these detailed practices are really for the purposes of working with the subtle energy of the body so that an individual is able to attain self-realization and to break the bonds of karma and release the soul and become one with all of creation. So this is where the knowledge of yoga is kept. Now, many teachers since these texts were written have developed the science of yoga further and developed their own techniques and their own training programs, and this has been going on for thousands of years. So you have many schools of yoga that are out there, each with their own lineage, and you have many modern lineages. A better name for really the modern lineage would be to call them brands. You have many modern brands of yoga that are also beginning to or have been sharing knowledge of yoga. Now, Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy is the traditional system of yoga therapy in India. It's a traditional system of understanding the effect that yoga has on our health and well-being. Today, there is a lot of interest in yoga therapy. Yoga therapy has always been a part of Ayurveda. In fact, when we think about Ayurveda, what we should realize is that Ayurveda is not a set of tools. It's a way of understanding the human being and their relationship to the world so that the energy can be balanced properly in the body and a person can experience optimum health and well-being. And when sick, they're able to experience healing. So everything in nature is considered a medicine that affects our energy in our bodies. including the practices of yoga. So today we're going to talk more about how the practices of yoga affect the physiology of the body, and how, by affecting the physiology of the body, we're able to either prevent disease or support healing to take place. Now, Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy, as I mentioned, is interested in the effect that yoga has on healing, and particularly how it affects the flow of energy in our body. When we talk about energy in an Ayurvedic perspective, what we're talking about are the qualities of nature. We're also talking about the elements, and we're talking about the 5 vayus, or the ways in which energy moves. And this is the language of Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy. When we talk about the qualities, for instance, we say that in nature some things are hot and some things are cold. Some things are heavy, some things are light, some things are sharp, some things are dull. There are 10 traditional pairs of opposite qualities. And in Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy, we seek to understand each asana, each mudra, each form of pranayama from an energetic perspective. What is it doing to the physiology of the body and the physiology of the mind? These are very important questions. Now, the qualities are also inherent within the elements. So each individual is made up of a certain constitution that can be described in terms of the 5 elements. So each of us has a certain amount of ether, air, fire, water, and earth within us. And that defines our constitution, or our prakriti. Prakriti means the original creation, the balance of energy at the moment of conception. That determines all of our tendencies. Now, if you understand your prakriti, then you also understand your tendencies. And if you understand your tendencies, then you're able to live in ways that are going to support you so that your tendencies toward disease do not manifest. That would be the goal of living harmoniously. The practice of yoga is very important, because if you practice a form of yoga, or you practice yoga in a manner that disturbs your tendencies, that facilitates your tendencies, well, then you will actually create more imbalances through your practice of yoga. So it's very important to understand yourself and know what form of yoga is going to be best for you for preventing disease. Now, it's not just the qualities, the 10 pairs of opposite qualities. It's not just the 5 elements that are important, but all of that is wrapped up within the 3 doshas. So if you understand your constitution in terms of the 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, then generalities can be made, and many specific things can be said about how to practice yoga in a manner that is also going to be supportive. So when you practice dosha-appropriate yoga, you should also be practicing in a manner that is going to take into consideration your elemental makeup and the 10 pairs of opposite qualities. Now, it's not just this that is important in Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy. It's also understanding what does a person need in terms of what we call in Ayurveda tonification or purification. Tonification is the word for that is brunhana, which means to make stronger, to make bigger, and langhana, to make smaller, to make more pure. And so what does an individual need? And each of us needs something different. And so if you have, for instance, a lot of excess dosha, excess tissue, more toxicity or ama in your body, then you probably need more purification, which means you have to practice yoga in a manner that supports purification. On the other hand, if you're very weak and you're frail, if you are not having very much ojas, what we call ojas in Ayurveda, which is what gives you stability, what gives you strength. If you don't have enough of that, then you need to practice yoga in a way that is more tonifying, more building, more strength. And I don't mean muscle strength, I mean your internal energy, what gives you endurance. That's going to be very, very important. So you have to practice. The practice of Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy is in accordance to your prakriti, your constitution. It's also in accordance to your vikruti, which means what has happened to you since you were incarnated. What's going on with you now? Are you experiencing any diseases? Are you experiencing any form of weakness or suffering? Is there a doshic disturbance within you? All of this defines what's happening within you now. When you understand yourself, you understand your constitution, you understand the nature of the imbalances within you, only then can you actually practice yoga in a manner that is going to best support you. And this is what the Ayurvedic texts say. You must always know the nature of the person, the nature of the imbalance, and the nature of the medicine. And in this case, we're talking about the nature of the medicine. And it has to be matched up for each individual. There is no one path in Ayurveda that is suitable for everybody. Each person in Ayurveda has their own unique needs. And we need to understand ourselves to understand our unique needs. Well, let me give a couple of examples, and then I'll be taking your questions on the subject. Let's just say you have an individual who is more Vata by nature. Well, that individual tends to be cold and dry, light, and mobile. Now, these are traditional qualities that we talk about in Ayurveda, but when we talk about them in the form of yoga, we might change the language a little bit. We might say that rather than being light, that they're very expansive, which means their energy tends to go upward and outward. And so their lighter energy, it tends to go up. So we need the opposite qualities in order to bring us back into balance. So a person of Vata nature, for instance, needs something that is warm and moist and heavier, or descending energy, bringing them down into the earth. And they need more stability rather than mobility. So yoga has to be practiced in a manner that is going to support these extra or these opposite qualities so that the physiology of the body can be normalized. So for instance, I've already mentioned that a person of Vata nature has a more mobile quality, which means they tend to move fast, maybe talk fast, they're very busy, the mind is very active, and they're probably going to be attracted to a form of yoga that also supports those tendencies. But in fact, Ayurvedic yoga wants you to do a form of yoga that is opposite to your tendencies. Because if you do something in accordance to your tendencies, you will become too light, too mobile, too cold, or too dry. And that creates disease in the body. So, as a simple application of Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy, and it gets much more complicated than this, but a simple application is that if you are Vata nature or Vata imbalance, then you want to practice yoga in a slower manner, in a more meditative manner. You want to spend more time in each asana. You don't want to be moving and flowing from one asana to another asana very quickly, or even at all. And I know there are some forms of yoga that are very flow-oriented, very movement-oriented, but those forms of yoga are not going to be ideal for a person with a Vata imbalance who's already moving too much inside of themselves. And so Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy is a form of wisdom to determine what form of yoga you need. Now, let's say you have a more Kapha nature or a Kapha imbalance. Well, this means that you have more, you're also cold, you're also a little moister, you're heavier, which means you have descending energy already, which we talk about in terms of the vayu. So there's an increase in apana vayu. You have more stability, and you're not moving very much. Maybe you're the couch potato. You're just not moving very much. Or even if you're not a couch potato, you move slowly through the world. Well, that's your tendency. So you need the opposite quality in order to bring you back into balance. So you would actually thrive on a form of yoga that has more motion in it, as an example. Okay? So flow yoga and different forms of yoga where there's a lot of movement really supports your physiology. So you see, there's nothing that's right for everyone, and everything is right for someone. All the forms of yoga are right for someone. The idea of Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy is to understand what form of yoga is right for you, is going to support you through your healing journey. And I think that's very important. Now, another example. Let's say you're of Pitta nature, which means that you're very hot. You also have some slightly ascending energy. You're a little moist. You have some mobility. It's more a form of instability than inherent mobility. But you do move easily through the world, and sometimes in a very focused and directed way, sometimes in a very fast way because you're so focused. Well, a person of Pitta nature who tends to be very hot would not be served by increasing the heat further within their bodies. And so that individual is going to be served by practicing in a manner that is going to support more relaxation, which has a cooling effect upon the body. And also certainly not practicing in a manner that involves excess external heat. We have a lot of hot yoga that is out there in the world, and hot yoga is wonderful for certain people, but not for people with a pitta imbalance. You've already got a rosy complexion, tendency toward red eyes, inflammation in your body. All of that heat only aggravates the heat within you. It increases it. You see, when you take in the same qualities that are inherent within you, you increase those qualities. And then that begins to cause physiological disturbances or roga, disease in your body. So Ayurvedic yoga therapy should be practiced in a manner that is the opposite of your tendencies in order to control your tendencies so that you don't develop disease, and also to normalize your physiology so you have the best chance of healing from disease. Now, what is the role of a yoga therapist, of an Ayurvedic yoga therapist? When we talk about the role of an Ayurvedic yoga therapist, what we really mean is a specialist who is trained in yoga, who has some Ayurvedic knowledge, hopefully or ideally working under the guidance of somebody with even more Ayurvedic knowledge, who is going to apply yoga in accordance with the traditional Ayurvedic principles to restore health to the body. That's what we mean. So there's many applications to that. So for instance, an Ayurvedic yoga therapist might work with an Ayurvedic practitioner, just like a Panchakarma therapist works with an Ayurvedic practitioner. And the Ayurvedic practitioner may be doing their consultations and developing their treatment plan. And part of that treatment plan may involve personalized yoga sessions where a person's learning how to practice in a way that's going to support them. Who is going to teach them that yoga? That is going to be the Ayurvedic yoga therapist's job. The Ayurvedic yoga therapist's job is to teach the patient what they need to do in order to support themselves. Now, in a busy center, in a busy clinic, there'll be many, many patients. So the Ayurvedic yoga therapist will hold classes in reducing vata or pitta or kapha through the practices of yoga. Now, I mentioned about asana, but it's so much more than that. Pranayama has energetics that have to be understood. Mudras have energetics that have to be understood. Even mantras have energetics that have to be understood. Everything in yoga is understood in terms of this language of physiology in the body. The Ayurvedic yoga therapy is the therapist, is the specialist who understands all of this, and then how to apply it and support the patient in order to be well, so that the Ayurvedic practitioner can focus on what is most important for them with their work, which is the lifestyle counseling, the herbal work, the management of disease, and so forth. So this is Ayurvedic yoga therapy. Now, in Ayurvedic yoga therapy, it's important to be properly trained, and there are many trainings now that are becoming available to people. The way we train Ayurvedic yoga therapists is, first and foremost, I need to say that you have to be a yoga teacher to become an Ayurvedic yoga therapist. So you should have already gone through primary yoga teacher training. This is important because it's your primary yoga teacher training that educates you about all the asanas and how to teach classes. Hopefully you have developed or are developing a capability to hold space in a class so that you can work with a group of people. Now, an Ayurvedic yoga therapy class is going to be individually designed to balance a particular dosha. And it can be designed within any tradition. While I'm trained in Sivananda Yoga, many of the students in our Ayurvedic yoga therapy program might be trained in flow yoga or Iyengar yoga or forest yoga or any of the other yogas that are out there. And so you don't have to have a particular training from a particular school, but before you take our Ayurvedic yoga therapy training program, we do want you to be a yoga teacher. And I think that's very, very important. You've been exposed to it. Now, in our Ayurvedic yoga therapy training program, you will be immersed in Ayurvedic yoga therapy for about 2 weeks. It's a 2-week immersion, and we hold it once per month, and we hold it in an ashram at the Sivananda Yoga Retreat in the Bahamas each year. It's a beautiful, absolutely lovely, sacred retreat where you'll be immersed in yoga and living yoga in an ashram from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to bed. In addition to all of your Ayurvedic yoga therapy training, You'll have the opportunity to be participating in morning and evening meditations, listening to discourse from various swamis on classical information related to yoga, and sometimes there are outside guest speakers as well. So that's also available. Now, in the 2-week training course, the yoga teachers are going to learn Ayurvedic philosophy. You're going to study Sankhya philosophy, which is the root of both Ayurveda and yoga. This is so important because if you don't understand the Sankhya philosophy, you won't understand the journey of the individual to becoming healthy. It's very, very important. You'll also understand and study Ayurvedic psychology. You'll need to understand how the mind works. Ayurveda and yoga psychology are interrelated to each other. So you're going to understand and study the chakras. You're going to understand and study the nadis. And this leads to an understanding of how breathing and body position all affects the flow of energy in the body. So you'll have extensive training in Ayurvedic and yogic psychology to be able to support individuals with psychological imbalances, as well as, of course, understanding the 5 elements, the 10 pairs of opposite qualities, the 3 doshas, and something I haven't talked too much about today, but you will also study the 5 vayus, because the 5 vayus are paramount to understanding how energy moves in the body. And every asana, every breath affects the 5 vayus and affects it differently. And when the vayus are not moving in a harmonious manner, that also contributes to disease. So you're going to study that as well. Now, you'll study Raja Yoga. You're going to study every limb of yoga during those 14 days. And so you're going to study the yamas and the niyamas, and you're going to learn about what effect the yamas and niyamas have from a health perspective. When you typically study yoga, you're learning about it from a spiritual perspective, how this is important to being able to quiet the mind and attain self-realization. But we're going to be exploring it from a health perspective. And if you don't practice it, how does that alter your physiology in a manner that is going to contribute to suffering? You're going to study the pranayamas, the various ways of breathing, and learn about how that affects you. You'll certainly study the asanas, and we certainly spend the most time on asanas because most people are interested in that. You're going to be working with the asanas all the time. We'll break down every single asana into its qualities, into its elements, into its doshas, into whether it's tonifying or purifying, and not just the asana itself in terms of its form, but how it is applied, whether you're moving quickly in it or being still in it. How does that affect the energy? And maybe most importantly, if there is an asana that's beneficial, that has a unique healing effect on you, how can you practice it in a way that is going to antidote the aspects of the asana that are causing imbalances within you or could cause imbalances within a person? This too is very important. There are no hard rules. There is no one flow for vata, one flow for pitta, one flow for kapha. Rather, Ayurvedic yoga therapy is individually designed, and it can be designed differently by different practitioners. What is most important is that you understand the principles that go into the design of the program for each patient. And that's what the 14-day immersion is all about. Now, that class, which is taught once per year, is now taught by one of our senior faculty members, Marisa Larson, who is a Sivananda-trained yoga teacher and is also a faculty member here at the California College of Ayurveda. So she's very well prepared to share that with you. As we go forward over the years, I'm sure I'll be teaching more of those classes once again as well. So that class takes place May 2nd until May 15th, 2019, and that'll be at the Sivananda Center in the Bahamas. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to start taking your questions. So I want you to feel welcome to ask questions if you have them. And my assistant, Jeanette, will write them down and bring them in to me. So if there's anything that I haven't covered that you want to know, by all means, feel welcome to answer that question, to ask that question. I'll feel welcome to answer it. Now, I'll give you just another example of looking at an asana, how we do that from an Ayurvedic perspective. So let's take an asana like, let's do something that's not too complicated. let's take a seated forward bend. Okay, let's take a seated forward bend, Paschimottanasana. And so you've got both of your legs out in front of you, your arms over your head, and you're doing a forward fold. And you're going to perhaps rest your hands down by your ankles. Your head is close to your knees. And we want to ask the question, what's happening when you do that? What's going on when you do that? Well, first of all, we have to understand that you're close to the ground and you are in alignment with the earth. And your Muladhara chakra, your first chakra, is lined up with the earth. And it's not only lined up with the earth, it is touching and connected to the earth. Now, we learn in Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy that means that that's creating a strong earth energy, a descending energy that's very good for Vata dosha. Okay. And so the earth is also very cooling, so it has a cooling effect upon you. But that's just one influence of the asana. As you fold over, and depending upon your posture, because it's not just the name of the posture, it's how you are in that posture. Many people, when they go into that posture, there is a fold at the solar plexus. And when the solar plexus flexes, well, the solar plexus is the site of fire. I like to think of that as an oven. That closes the oven door and it traps the heat and it increases your Agni. And if you put pressure on your solar plexus, that increases your Agni. It builds up heat. Individuals with a more Pitta nature could have problems with that. Okay. Now, you're also folding. Your whole body is folding into your legs. Now, when that happens, you are not open and receptive to the world around you. You've become more closed off, more protective. All right. And so this is balancing actually to the ether energy of your body, the ether of your mind, the ether around you. Ether is empty space. You're closing down that space when you come into that posture. So we're going to look at it in terms of the energetics of it. So if we were looking at the qualities, we would say, well, it's actually a little bit heating. It's actually heating because you've closed that solar plexus. All right. Now, it's also balancing to Vata because you've closed down the empty space that's there. So we could say that it's balancing for Vata, it's increasing to Pitta. What is it doing to Kapha? Well, if we're just looking at it on the surface we'd have to say, well, if it's so rooted into the earth, then it couldn't be very good for Kapha. But what's interesting is that in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it says, no, this is actually very good for Kapha. It's very good for weight loss. So where does that come from? Where does that come from? It's because if you hold that posture for a long time and you've closed the oven door and you've increased the heat, that the heat becomes so strong that it starts to burn up the excess Kapha. Agni is the destroyer of Kapha if it gets to be real strong. And so it can also balance the Kapha dosha, which means that if you were to do it and you were a person of Pitta nature, you have the greatest risk because of all of that heat. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means maybe you should do it for shorter periods of time. Vata benefits from it because not only is it grounding, it's warming. And Vata loves the combination of grounding and warming. And Kapha benefits from it when it's held for a very long time because that's going to really increase the heat in the body. Now, there's so many more nuances that I can go into on every single asana, but we can't do that here, obviously, on a Facebook Live class. So I want to encourage you that if you're interested in Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy, then by all means, contact us and learn more. Come and attend our Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy certification course. It's a 14-day immersion held once per year in the Sivananda Center in the Bahamas. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time to tune in to today's Facebook broadcast, and I'll end with a mantra. This is a mantra for breaking attachments. Mantra is also a healing tool, and so many times our attachments are what are giving us our challenges. The yogi seeks to be flexible. The more flexible we become, not just of body, but of mind, not just of mind, but of consciousness, then the more we are able to expand and the more we're able to connect to the greater whole. So this is the Mahamrityunjaya mantra. It's a mantra for breaking attachments. Many of you know this mantra, perhaps. It's also called Triambakam. Triambakam yajamahe sugantim pushtivardhanam urva rukamiva bantanan mrityo mukshiyamam brutat. Om Triambakam yajamahe sugantim pushtivardhanam urva rukamiva bantanan mrityo mukshiyamam brutat. Om Triambakam yajamahe sugantim pushtivardhanam urva rukamiva bantanan mrityo mukshiyamam brutat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Peace Peace Peace. Namaste. Thank you once again for attending today's class. If you have any questions, feel welcome to contact the school and we will contact you back, both with your questions about what is Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy as well as your questions about our courses. Thank you so much for attending today's Facebook Live class. Many blessings to you as you continue your journey. Namaste.